Can you imagine getting 2 years of education for 1,800 for less than $4,000 a school year today? It's impossible. Okay, you couldn't even barely pay for your books, depending on your course of study, for $4,000, law and medical and medicine included. So I wanted to go to the best. I knew I could. I wanted to do this. This was my complete desire from the age I was 13 or 14 to write and work for newspapers. Why newspapers? I have no idea. Except I always thought it would be great to write stories to inform people about events going on in their world.
What newspapers did you read when you were growing up?
The Sun and the Sun-Times. My father never allowed the Chicago Tribune in the house, the paper I worked for 30 years. It was interesting because I remember in 1948, I was 13, and we were listening to the election results on radio, and they came out about 7 or 8 o'clock. They came out and said that the Chicago Tribune announced that Dewey had won the election, even though the votes showed that Truman was ahead. I said, should we get a paper? He says, no, said my father. He said, never allow that paper in our house. Okay. We knew two things about the Tribune growing up. The Tribune was an arch-Republican conservative, knew three things: arch-Republican conservatives organization that was anti-Semitic and anti-black.
We were all at this party, and the kid, he wasn't there yet. He wasn't out of the army yet. But I sat there and I talked to this, what I thought was an old man. He was not even 60 at the time. And I said to my mother afterwards, who was that nice guy I was talking to? And she said, well, that's the rabbi of the temple that I would like you to come and visit occasionally. And I said, well, it's a nice guy, but forget the whole thing, you know. I wasn't into temples at the time. So, but then they made sure we met, and we did.
And you were married on November 5th?
1950.
1950.
But this was in about 45.
Well, I got out of the army in 1946.
46.
So it was about...
was in 46.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it took about 4 years.
It did.
Okay. In those days, courtships lasted a lot longer than they do.
This one almost didn't last.
Really?
I finally decided I'd had it with this guy, and I went to New York and worked at Cornell Medical Center for a while. But then he came after me.
He pursued you.
He pursued.
I did, and she was quite willing.
Yes. One of the big things that most Jews finally resorted to after they had exhausted their friends and relatives who might have been out of town in other countries was to look through the phone books. Well, my father also got the phone books, went to the library and looked in the phone books of the biggest cities in the United States under our name, Tersh. And it wasn't a very common name, and he wasn't surprised that he couldn't find anybody by the name of Tersh in the New York, or Philadelphia, or Cincinnati, or L.A. He didn't find. But finally, in a Chicago phone book, there was somebody by the name of Tersh, spelled the same way, T-E-R-S-C-H, Harold Tersh. Well, he immediately wrote a letter to him, hoping that this was a long-lost cousin or uncle or whatever, and begged him to send us an affidavit. Well, none of us were surprised when we never got an answer. Who would take on that kind of responsibility? So after that, my father went back to the phone books and checked for any Jewish organizations he could think of, for Hadassah or Council of Jewish Women. He checked them all out, wrote to all of them, didn't hear from any of them, but then one day we got a telegram which was sent to us, and it said affidavits for the 4 of you on the way. Well, we didn't know whether this was just some horrible hoax or whether this actually, because the name signed was Raymond E. Law. We never heard of such a person, and it wasn't, of the many letters my father had sent, that wasn't one of them. But then shortly after, we got a letter explaining what had happened. It turned out that Mr. Raymond E. Law, who was the president of Exchange National Bank, which I think at the time was called Halstead Bank or Halstead Exchange National Bank, had asked one of his Jewish employees how he could go about finding a Jewish family that he could help. He was Catholic, but he just was horrified by what was happening to the Jews in Nazi Germany. And this man said, well, my wife belongs to Council of Jewish Women. Why don't you go to them? They have an office downtown. So he went there and introduced himself and said that he would like to save one Jewish family. Well, this isn't something that happened to them all the time. It probably hadn't happened at all. They handed him that day's mail. They'd been getting lots of mail from people asking for help. They handed him that day's mail, and somehow he picked my father's letter. Something appealed to him in that, and he sent us affidavits for the 4 of us. I still have copies of it. In fact, I also have the original, but I don't even let that out of my sight. Okay. This is one of the most important documents I have.
$10,500 seemed like a fortune. We both liked the notion of coming to Chicago. Don't forget the congregation was at 82nd and Jeffrey and whatnot. They made it very easy for us to want to come here, and so bye-bye Muskegon, Michigan, and bye-bye Plymouth, Mass, even though it was home, and bye-bye Valley Stream, which was already gone down the way, and here we are.
And what year did you come?
It was 1964, June, and we've been here ever since.
To TBY.
Yeah.
TBY, 82nd and Jeffrey.
Right. And we were just loaded with invitations, and Papa Stein, Trudy's father, Mrs. Stein also invited us to their home, and
Trudy Altman.
Trudy Altman.
Right.
And Papa Stein kissed my hand and said, "It is a pleasure to have you in my home," like that. And I said, "We're staying here. I like this place."
Sarah was from the middle group, and she was already living with an older group, and she had a few pennies that she had put on the fireplace of the older sister that she was living with when the second pogrom, there was word that a second pogrom was going to occur.
Are we still talking turn of the century? Turn
of the century, 04, 05, around then. There was a man who had a lumber yard in town. And when he heard that the pogroms were coming, he invited some of the family to come to a cellar that he had that was much larger than the cellars that any of the individual families had, and would have been safer for them, because he got them down there, he covered it up with grass, and he himself was not Jewish, so they wouldn't have suspected him. And the Cossacks came, and as they were approaching, Jack, the baby, the mom didn't have a bottle for him. They had left in such haste to go to this cellar. And he began crying, and the other people in the cellar said, "You'll have to smother him because it's going to reveal our whereabouts." And she held Jack very, very tightly, and he settled down and stopped crying. And the family always talked about that as the second miracle. Sarah,
there's no question they were going to get killed if they got hit by the Cossacks.
Absolutely. When they came out from the basement
and they're walking down the street back to their homes. Sarah remembered till her dying day, saying to her mother, "Oh, I hope my pennies that I hid on the fireplace are okay." And she said the mother slapped her and said, "You're worried about your pennies. Look what's happened here." And the streets were filled with feathers, like from feather beds, from quilts, covered with blood, flying through the streets. And then she realized how serious this was and that people had been slaughtered.
What do you think about immersion is such a powerful experience? What is it that makes it so powerful?
I don't know if it's the preparation takes place before, that you are before the bedding and they are judging you, and
the bedding consisting of
3 rabbis that are basically judges. They ask you questions. Their mission, I understand, is to reject you because being a member of the community is not easy. It's not easy task to be a Jew. Okay, and even now I kind of understand their point of view, because for example, I am already a stereotype because I'm Latino. Okay, and if I'm Latino, I have to be Catholic, right? And some people, and that's the part that surprises me, that are college educated and don't know that there are other communities aside Israel and the United States. I mean, that shocks me, okay? And so those little things, I understand why they try to tell you. I mean, they try to make it very hard for you to convert, in other words, but because this set of 3 rabbis have to feel that you really want to take this task. For me, it was like being in Mount Sinai and saying yes, okay, and that's how I took it. And I think that when you do this at an adult age like me, okay, you know what you want.
We didn't actually get to the story, but about the Yom Kippur, that your mother was afraid that you and your sister would faint or something.
Oh, yeah. Well,
so what is that
my
story?
mother was always, my sister and I both, even though we weren't terribly observant, we did not go to religious services on Shabbat. We always observed Yom Kippur. My father always fasted, and my sister and I also wanted to fast. So we did, and my mother always worried, but instead of going to a synagogue, he took us for a walk. We went to the park. We walked. But my mother was always so concerned about our starving, our feeling sick or anything, that she always made us take a bottle of hot cocoa along, and it was just a matter of try it with us. We never drank it until we came home. That's yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again.
Well, you are very welcome.